Excited to chat with you about one of my favorite topics in the world, which is making education fun and doing gamification correctly. I'm going to jump right in because this video is going to be posted. So I'm going to put a lot of information up front, and I'm going to try to communicate as clearly and quickly to you as I can. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and I'll open it up to questions, and we can even just jam on some ideas if you want to talk about a project you're working on and how gamification can maybe be a part of that. So really excited to share with you all today. If you haven't already, say hello in the chat. If you don't know who I am, I help organizations clarify complexity with training. I've been an educator for 7 years in the classroom. I've been an entrepreneur for 8 years in and out of the classroom, running my own businesses. And I've been an AI aficionado for the last 3 years. Definitely not an expert by any means, but I've used these tools every day in my work for the last 3 years. And a lot of that work has been about building gamified experiences for companies and making learning engaging. And I've worked for companies like Snapchat, Ramp, Solana Blockchain, and Niantic, the people who made Pokemon Go. So wide range of people that I've worked with on this. For today, as I said, one of our norms is that I'm going to be going really quickly here. I want to share all of this great information that I have with you as quickly as possible. And I also want you to speak up. So drop questions that you have in the chat. I'll pause after each section and answer one or two questions before moving on. And most importantly, if you like what you see, please share. I'll be posting this on YouTube afterwards and make sure that everyone has a link. And so if this is relevant to somebody in your line of work, please send it to them because your recommendations and trust always opens doors for me. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about here is just over my years of working in education and working with businesses. One of the things I hear a lot frequently is, of course, I want my training to be fun. Of course, I would like to involve some elements of game in what I'm doing or the project I'm designing. But is gamification becoming less effective, or was it even effective to begin with? Is gamification actually something we can do well? And I see this a lot, and I would argue yes. And I would say that one of the issues we have is that most gamification actually only focuses on 5 elements of games. And so I want to review what are the big things of gamification that we all know. I also refer to this as pointsification, which again are going to be these big topics that we talk about in terms of gamification, but don't actually capture what we love about games. So the first thing of gamification is points. We see this everywhere. In terms of points, this is almost like how many coins do you collect in Mario? But a lot of other things have been pointsified in our life. The like counter on Instagram, LinkedIn. There's so much of our systems and structures that are put out of you put something out in the world and you get a number that tells you how well you did back. The other big thing that we see in terms of the big 5 of gamification, the most common types here are the badges that we see. This is hugely popular on sites like LinkedIn, and badges are a huge part of games of you've gotten this achievement, congratulations. And a lot of times these are thrown in at the end. And a lot of times the point of a badge is to be social so that anyone can see it. And a lot of times we put badges in not social places because we assume that it will motivate people when it is not actually connected to anything. The next thing is leaderboards. We see leaderboards a lot. If you've ever played Kahoot, if you've ever been a teacher who's used Kahoot in your classroom, you know it is incredibly motivating for students to be in that top 3 grouping of who did the best on the Kahoot quiz. But we also see leaderboards and things like the Instagram For You page or the trending pages on a lot of different websites. This in a lot of ways communicates who are our leaders here, who should we be listening to. Progress bars. Progress bars are everywhere. I can't think of a tutorial or an app that doesn't include a progress bar in some way to keep you motivated and keep you aware of how much work needs to be done before you pass into the next level. And then on top of that, levels, we see levels in a lot of different places, but the one that I hear people talking about the most is their airline status. I've heard crazy stories of people booking long flights to Alaska just so that they can hold on to their Sky Miles status here. And so these systems and structures are sometimes really motivating to people. So these are the big 5. These are the things that we typically see when we talk about gamification. But I would argue that these are not the most effective parts about games, and they're not actually what we love about games. So I would argue that we need to move away from the big five and think deeper about gamification because one, these elements are overused. They're not the kind of thing that is surprising or interesting when we see them because we now see them in every facet of our society and technology and education. Second, all of these things that we just talked about rely on extrinsic motivation, motivation that comes from the outside world. But the reality is, unless you are a soccer star, unless you are a paid athlete, almost nobody plays games for their extrinsic motivation. We play for the intrinsic part of games, the things that make us feel excited and motivated on the inside. And as I said, these are not what we love about games. If you ask people, why is Super Mario the greatest game of all time? No one is going to say, because I love it when the coins go up and the number of the coins go up. And so if we really want to build things for gamification, if we really want to build things in order to make them joyful and experience them, we need to think at the very root about what makes games intrinsically motivating. And so these are four, I'm going to call them less obvious gamification techniques that we're going to explore today. And I'm really excited to share these with you. So the first is narrative and storytelling. We're going to talk about how I incorporate that in almost all the work I do. The second thing is simulations. How can we simulate environments in order to let people practice skills? And then the third is feedback loops. How can we give feedback in a way that is motivating and encourages people to come back to our system over and over again? And then lastly, joy of discovery. I would also couch this inside of ambiguity and how useful ambiguity can actually be in terms of our systems and keeping people coming back and wanting to learn more. All right, I'm going to start on storytelling. At the end of storytelling, I'll stop and I'll take one or two questions or ideas if you want to throw them out. Be loud in the chat. We learn through social learning. So if you can share what you're experiencing right now, somebody else in the chat you might really unlock things for them. So please go ahead and share what you're thinking as we go along here. Jumping into storytelling and narrative. So why does storytelling work? Story is a huge part of the most successful games. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how storytelling is a part of games because we know it. Dungeons and Dragons, Legend of Zelda, Elden Rings, games that have sold billions and billions of dollars with the copy, all focus on storytelling and making the people feel that the users feel that they're a part of that story. In terms of educational research, how do we know that this is effective? Well, one, we know that narrative helps us create meaning and it helps us organize information. Our brain is not good at just grabbing random information and giving it meaning. But when we give narrative and structure, we are able to organize that information and retain it and recall it better. Also, characters give us a chance to increase engagement and also recall that information later on. And then we also have research that stories support immersion in the classroom. It helps students feel engaged, and this has been shown to increase our learning metrics as well. All right, I want to just quickly share three examples of how I use storytelling and narrative. One, I want to talk about how we use it to organize information. Two, I want to share how I use characters as anchor points. And then three, we are going to ask people how I ask people to tell stories about themselves in order to learn more about them. So first and foremost, using stories to organize information. This is a large part of the work that I do. When we take complex ideas and place them in a story, we are able to quickly learn a lot more and organize that information a lot quicker. At the bottom here, this is a quick example. I've taught a finance and accounting curriculum, made this large scalable curriculum. And what we found was these really complex idea of how finance and accounting affect our lives. They feel very ambiguous. They feel very ethereal and out in the air here. But once we put them in the structure of a story, we're able to see how they connect to our lives, the impact that we have. And so with the finance and accounting curriculum, we did this long story where we showed how all of these principles impacted a small business, and it helped them retain the information a lot better. My image that is not loading here that I tried to slyly pull up, but I was unable to. A part of this process of using stories to organize information is that when we use characters, we can use these as anchor points. So the story that we created for this finance and accounting curriculum centered on Alex, who was taking her farm stand and growing it into a larger grocery store. And what we did is throughout that curriculum, we used the same photos of the same stock photo actor. But what we did is we used the backgrounds. We changed the backgrounds. And so we always had the same face of the same character, but then we put that face in different positions and locations in order to like really give these people a grounding point and to help them feel emotionally connected to Alex and her journey. I'm going to jump back to using stories to organize information. If you think about teaching the rain cycle to a fourth grader, the rain cycle actually includes a lot of really complex topics and ideas: evaporation, condensation. These things are really big ideas to wrap your head around. But if we tell a fourth grader the story of, hey, what if we took the story of one raindrop and traced it throughout the entire cycle? That student would then have a much easier and clearer narrative that they could use to then later connect to these complex terms here. And then lastly, asking people to tell stories so that we can learn from them. People aren't good at just describing themselves. If you look at self-report data, if you look at all this stuff, we're actually really bad at talking about ourselves and our own experiences. And so if we ask people to tell stories about themselves, we can actually learn a lot about them really quickly. This is an example of an AI skill diagnostic that I made recently. The idea was I wanted to understand how people were using AI so that I could give them advice on how to do this or how to use it better. Unfortunately, what I found is people can't just tell you, this is how I use AI. So instead, I created stories of different situations that you might find yourself and then asked people to describe their approach. People could either write their answers or click on the bullet points here. Either way, they're kind of interacting with this story and showing how they would respond to this situation, which then gets them to reveal a little bit more personal information here. This is a classic interviewer technique. You don't say, explain to me how you are self-reliant. You say, can you tell me a story about how you were self-reliant at your last job? So when we ask people to couch their own information inside of narrative, they're easier able to talk about themselves and share things themselves. This is another example of a tool that I've created recently using VoiceFlow. And basically what this does is it allows people to interact with the story and share their opinion on what they would do in different segments of the story. All that information is collected and handed off to a coach so that we can see what does this person understand about communication tools here. Let's jump in next here into simulations. A lot of people who aren't gamers don't know this, but simulation games are incredibly popular. I'm sure we all remember when Farmville was the most popular app in the Facebook on Facebook. These games continue to be incredibly popular. I just learned the other day that Power Wash Simulator sold almost $500 million worth of games, and they are currently making Power Wash Simulator 2. The whole game, you go around and clean things with a power washer. I don't understand why people play these games, but I think that the reason these games are so popular, it's just not my cup of tea is what I'm saying. But I think the reason these games are so popular is speaks in part to how we can use them in educational settings. Simulations allow us to practice parts of the experience without being bogged down in the specifics, requirements, and hard parts of real life. And so when we think about a simulation, we're basically letting people play with concepts in a way that does not require us to get bogged down in all the true difficulties. And we know that there are benefits to this because of the educational research. When we have the simulation that mimics real world scenarios, it allows people to apply those theoretical concepts. And we know that that allows them to transfer those concepts and skills over into different venues of their life. Also, when you ask somebody to engage in a simulation, we're not just practicing one skill or one piece of knowledge. We're pulling on all of their different skills and disciplines, which is a lot closer to how we have to apply our skills in real life. And then simulations allow students to experience failure without real world consequences. As adult learners, we don't typically get chances to fail where there isn't a consequence. We typically need to be really on the ball all the time. And so when we can create these simulations, we can encourage risk-taking and deeper learning because people know that they're safe and they know that making a mistake isn't going to end up in them having some huge issue. Okay. Some quick examples of how I use simulations. First, we can simulate systems. I got a couple of great examples for this. Then we can use crude parallels to bring out behavior changes in people. And then third, we can use meaningful roles and connect those to real world outputs. And I'll dive into what that looked like in my ninth grade literature classroom. So first of all, we can simulate systems. Down at the bottom here, this game has been running on coolmath.com for about 20 years. And this is a classic assignment that algebra teachers use as a way to teach concepts of math here, of running a lemonade stand here. And so you can think about how much more motivating this would be to a student to do the algebra problem of how many cups of sugar or how many glasses of ice are we going to need each day for my lemonade stand, as opposed to just doing a math problem that is not connected in any way to any kind of context or scenario here. And so you can do this, you can create small games that help us play with these ideas. In my ninth grade literature class, we would do this with systems of government in order to explore how a democracy, dictatorship, and communism all kind of worked in different ways. But again, the idea is that we're creating systems here in order to do this. If you're thinking, well, I can't create a game like this, this is when I start to pull in generative AI into my practice. When we need to create systems like this that typically that require a large amount of labor to create, we can use AI systems in order to reduce the amount of labor and create these systems more quickly so that they represent these ideas. I'm going to jump second to crude parallels to illicit behavior. This is one of my favorite examples of gamification that you might not think of as gamification. This is the classic health teacher example of giving a flower baby. If you've never seen this in Freaks and Geeks or any other sitcom of this high school show, the idea is that you have a flour sack that represents a baby, and then students need to do tasks in order to take care of this. I've seen this look like leaving a voicemail at 2 a.m. to show that you woke up and took care of the baby at that time. But the idea is that when we pick something up like a bag of flour and we say, this is a baby, when we create a crude parallel here, we're actually able to encourage people to take on behavior that they typically wouldn't take on. I do this a lot with my company that I work with, Ready. We make AI simulations for call centers. Here you can see an example of one of our script trainings where you have an AI listening and continuing the call process with you. You can see that the person is supposed to read the script as they would in a typical call, and then we have an AI voice responding to it. At no point does this really feel like you're talking to a human, but I can tell you that it changes people's behavior because they are putting time, care, and concern into reading this script correctly because they know that the simulation is going to react differently based off of what they do here. And then the most important part of this is that we level up the simulations as they go throughout. So this first script training is very simple. You're just reading the script and getting a response. But as we go further and further into the trainings, it becomes more open world. And eventually you have your whole work system in front of you. And it is a simulation of that work system where, again, it's not a big deal if you fail, but we see agents trying harder to do their best here because they are getting that immediate feedback and they are living inside of this simulation where it feels more real. The last thing is just connecting meaningful roles to outside the meaningful roles connect to the real world outputs. This is more of an educational setting as opposed to a professional setting thing. But one of the most powerful tools I had in my tool belt as a ninth grade literature teacher was to say, you are not all ninth graders today. Today, you are Netflix writers. Okay, this is the Netflix writing room. And I would do that every year for our short story unit. And I would put Netflix logos up on the door. And I would say, you are actually writing the next script that is going to be made by a Netflix writer. Now, I couldn't actually turn their scripts into writing, but what I did is have a professional writer actually come in, and the 5 best students of each class got feedback from a professional writer in their thing. Same thing with plays. I would say, you are not a ninth grader anymore. You are the director of this play. And, we can do this as well at work by saying, hey, today we are not going to be employees of this company. Today we are all putting on the hat of a data scientist. Okay. What is the job of a data scientist? How does that connect to what we are doing in this moment? And basically by saying to people, hey, I want you to imagine yourself, play pretend with me for a moment, and think of yourself in this different role, we can elicit different behaviors from people. The last thing I'll say on simulations is the most important part is that loop, right? Each loop of the simulation should get closer and closer to the real world, should incorporate those complexities that we have removed at previous steps here so that students can get closer and closer to practicing the real thing. Okay, we're going to talk about feedback loops. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because when you think about games, you don't think about feedback, but feedback, whether you win or lose, is actually what keeps gamers motivated. Feedback in games, feedback in games is really well designed in that it is lightweight, it is formative, and typically it doesn't get in the way of you continuing the experience. So why is feedback so daunting in an educational setting? We'll get to that in a second, but just to go to the literature for a second, we know that feedback is an essential part of the learning process. The faster you can give it and the more robust you can give it, the more engagement and learning we're going to see from students. As I said before, video games give us immediate feedback that is formative and typically really effective and engaging. And then lastly, when feedback is non-threatening, we have a better chance of inspiring a growth mindset from students. So how can we create these feedback loops for students and employees? One, I think that technology is really key to this. Two, I always encourage people to do rough drafts with constraints. Three, share your work with novel audiences, finding a chance to share what you've done with somebody new. And then fourth is using feedback games and rituals to reduce the blow of feedback. All right. Technology is key. If you've ever had a stack of worksheets that you needed to grade, a giant set of essays, or a large amount of performance reviews, feedback takes time and energy, okay? And when we can use technology in order to speed up this process, in order to reduce the labor required from us to give a meaningful output to people, that is how we are better able to engage our learners and employees in these processes. And so for me, what that looked like was organizing all student essays on Google Drive so that I could immediately see their progress. I could see the history of how they had worked. I could easily leave comments, and I could leave a large amount of feedback in a short amount of time. For you, that might look different in terms of having challenging tests that are scalable and every single person can take them at your company, or it might look like creating an AI system that gives formative feedback to employees as they go so that they are able to get quick hit feedback and not get stuck in one spot here. Second is rough draft with constraints. When students walk into my 9th grade literature class, I never gave them the chance to sit down and write a paper right away. First, you needed to show me you could make an outline. Then you needed to show me you could write one body paragraph correctly. Then you needed to show me that you could do your intro and outro correctly. Then I would actually let students sit down and write a full paper. When we are asking people to take on complex tasks, it's really helpful to stopgap them and give them a meaningful amount of work that isn't going to overwhelm them. And that also helps us give feedback, because if we limit the scope of what we're talking about in each step and stage of these rough drafts, or each step and stage of this progress, we're able to give really targeted feedback quickly and reduce the labor so that we can give it immediately and effectively. Third is giving people a chance to share their work with novel audiences. And by this, I just mean it is really helpful to put your work in front of somebody that you have never put it in front of, or in a way that you have never done this before. If you've ever seen a guest lecturer come into a classroom, you know that the very first 15 minutes, they have a lot more attention span and leeway with the audience than the traditional person who is giving all of the feedback here. And so I always think about how can we get people who are typically outside of the system in here to give a stage so that our learners have a new stage and a new person to share their work with here. It's incredibly motivating. Right now, I'm incredibly motivated to do well because I have never presented to this group of people before, and I want to make sure that you are getting the best out of this experience. So how can we put our students in front of groups of people that they have never done before so that they have these new chances to practice what they are attempting to do? And that actually ties back to the Netflix writer's room, where once my students, I used that as a reward. I said, if you do well enough, then somebody else will read your work and give you feedback on it. And it's somebody whose opinion you respect, right? All right, and then lastly is feedback games and rituals. Anybody who has to give feedback, do coaching, any of those things, I really encourage you to read the book. Thanks for the feedback. It does a really great job of just, it's like 80 pages, but super dense. And it does a great job of breaking down the actual brain science of what happens to us when we receive feedback. And the reality is 80% of that just immediately gets shut out because we're protecting ourselves. And so when we can set up a game or a ritual where we know the feedback is coming, we know everybody in the group is receiving feedback, we greatly reduce that stigma because it's just a part of our narrative of what's going to happen. Everyone is going to receive feedback. And so my easiest, lightweight solution for this that I offer to people is I like, I wish, what if as sentence starters for feedback. And so everyone is going to get feedback on their output. And it's always going to start with I like, positive things I see, I wish, constructive criticism of what I wish I saw here. And then what if is brand new ideas. What if you did this digitally? What if you completely flipped the script? What if we got rid of this part? And we're generating ideas for that person. And again, if everybody knows that they're going to receive that feedback and they know how they're going to receive it, that we're much more likely to feel comfortable and listen to these. Okay, I'm going to jump right into Joy of Discovery, and I'll hold this open. I'll hold the last 10 minutes open for any questions or comments people would like to make. So as an educator, we are typically instructed to be as clear and to the point as possible. There should be no ambiguity in your instructions, but letting students discover independently can sometimes be more effective. Part of this is creating desirable difficulties, creating effortful tasks that lead to students needing to transfer their knowledge and skills from other parts of their life here. Also, we know that when there's ambiguity in tasks, it pushes students to synthesize ideas themselves and form their own conclusions. And then lastly, when we're working in uncertainty, students have to pull in those real world skills that help them navigate that as well. Again, not just practicing one skill in isolation, but practicing all of our skills together in this context. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways I do this. 1 is just introducing meaningful ambiguity. 2 is our chances to opt in. And then 3 is planned adventures. So what do I mean by meaningful ambiguity? In the chat real quick, do you see a duck or a rabbit? Depending on which way you tilt your head, depending on where you focus your eye here, you might see either a duck or a rabbit. If you ever want to waste 15 minutes with a group of middle schoolers, put this up there and then let them debate what they see here. But when we slow down and let these things, and we don't say that there's a right answer, we engage students more in this. And so jobs like being a salesperson or being a writer are incredibly complex jobs that don't have one correct answer to them. So why would we say, hey, here's exactly how you need to do? When we create space for ambiguity and acknowledge the complexity of things, we encourage people to engage more, form their own conclusions. And so be really careful about saying this is the correct answer, because once we do, we're shutting down a part of people's brain because they're saying, oh, nice, they've given me the answer. I don't need to think any deeper about this. Secondly, when we talk about the joy of discovery, I know that this is difficult in an educational setting, but we need to give people a chance to opt in. Games are games because we choose to play them. And every moment you continue to choose to still play the game. At any time, you can pause a video game and walk away. If you're really not enjoying the pickup soccer game you're playing, you can stop playing and walk away. But that is not necessarily the reality of our educational experiences. And so when I create scalable educational experiences, the continue block that people have to click continue and pull up the next page is my most used block, because I want people to constantly be reminding themselves and checking in with themselves and say, all right, am I ready to move on to the next section? Am I ready to opt into the next part of this learning experience here? So give people a chance to opt in, even if you're kind of tweaking them and saying, all right, you got to do it, but you choose when you're ready to do it. And then lastly is planned adventures. Choose your own adventures. are one of my favorite mediums as a kid. I loved all the Goosebump Choose Your Own Adventure books. And so we can create these kind of things. And I see educators doing this in a really smart and creative way. One way are escape rooms kind of inside the classroom that I've seen people as well. And the other, just to give you a direct experience of what I mean here, one of the best lessons I ever did was a blind date with a book or blind date with a poem. And the way that we did this is I had just had envelopes that said a poem about love, a poem about grief, a poem about whatever the topic might be. And then students would have to grab the envelope, pull out the poem, unfold it, and decide, is this the poem that I want to write the literary analysis about? There's a giant pile of envelopes with about 15 different poems in them, and students would search through and take their time, and then at a certain point, they had to lock in what poem it was that they wanted to do their literary analysis in. Now, I've actually controlled the experience because I know that all 15 of the poems are worth writing a literary analysis about. But to the learner, to the user, it feels like they have the ability to explore around and turn over different rocks until they find the thing that they're actually looking for. So, how can we create these planned adventures where we know that things are going to happen within the confines, but to the user, to the learner, it feels like they are exploring and uncovering something for themselves? Again, this is a very labor intensive process. And so my encouragement here is use Gen AI in order to take a really solid idea and transform it into something else. Again, for a choose your own adventure, this is definitely something that I use generative AI in to make kind of branching pathways of narratives inside of Articulate. Okay. All right. So again, just to review here, these are our big five. The reason that they are most popular is because they are the easiest parts of gamification to pull out and just drop in or drop on top of something. Specifically badges. The number of times I've been in a meeting and they're like, well, can't we just make it a LinkedIn badge at the end? And it's like, yeah, but is anyone going to look at that? Is anyone going to value it? These are their easiest to implement, which doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that we need to be careful about overusing them and using them in a way that doesn't actually reflect what we love about games. So I would encourage you to experiment with these, see if you can think about the project from the very beginning about how you're going to incorporate these different elements of storytelling, simulation, feedback, and discovery in order to make these experiences intrinsically motivating. I hope that this was helpful, guys. Thank you for playing with me for a moment, and really appreciate those of you who stuck around. If you have any questions, I got 10 more minutes here, so would love to answer any questions, or if you just want to talk or think about a project that you're going through, would love to hear about it. Thank you guys so much.
Connor, that was great.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking about like short-term versus long-term like gamification installation.
Hmm.
So like for my like right now I'm in financial planning and one of the biggest things that I want to focus on is like educating people on how to like really engage in that and like what it means to have a strong plan. So I'm thinking about doing some of this like longer term like simulation is an
Hmm.
awesome idea and I love that. That's more long term. I'm thinking more of like the short term like mindset. Like, is there like a gamification mindset that I could like maybe language that I could trigger of like, hey, this versus this outcome versus this?
Yeah, I think that like a lot of why gamification is effective is because it's always user-centric design, right? Like you're
Right.
always thinking about it from the player's point of view. Otherwise, you're not designing a game, you're designing a book, right? And so when you can think about things from a user-centric point of view, if you can think even about like narrative of like what is the story that you want your clients to believe about your services, and really thinking about it from their point of view and how you are the helpful guide on the side, as
Yeah.
opposed to how you are the hero of the story because your user is the hero of the story. You
Right.
can really quickly, I think, reframe both your marketing messaging and then too just the way that you like talk to people.
Hmm. All right. Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.